recording recording the distribution of seagrass, mapping them out, that kind of thing. So yeah, that's the kind of thing we'll be looking at today. So okay, so just I mean I'm sure probably you all know really where what area we're talking about, but Kinsale and Oysterhaven is where we do most of our work with seagrass. So they're basically directly south of Cork City, pretty much. The two adjacent inlets. Um, so yeah, Oysterhaven to the east, Kinsale to the west. Um, and this is obviously a drone photograph of Oysterhaven Bay, and I always think it's quite good to take a second. You know, a lot of us would be divers anyway, and are probably used to seeing what's under the sea. But I think this kind of view, looking across the water, when you're at the surface, looking out to sea, you've got no idea what's underneath the water. And in fact, in this picture here, where those kind of four central boats are moored, there's a really big seagrass bed, but you really wouldn't know that it was there unless you were diving or actually getting in the water to have a look at it. So I suppose a good starting point is what is seagrass? So seagrass is a true plant. So seaweeds, kelps and wracks and sea lettuce, things like that, are algae. So they don't have roots, they don't have leaves, they don't have flowers or seeds. They're a kind of, I suppose, a more primitive kind of plant. They still photosynthesize, turn sunlight into energy. But the seagrass is a true plant, so it's actually related to the types of plants you have in your own garden. So it does have all these things. It has roots, it has flowers, and it has seeds. So in the picture on the right-hand side there, you can see a little filament sticking out of one of the stems there in the middle, and that is a seagrass flower. And the white kind of lumps you can see in the stems there are the developing seeds. And seagrasses are the only fully marine true plants in the world. There are around about 70 species. We think there's 72 species worldwide, of which we have three or four, which is a little bit up for debate. There's a bit of scientific discrepancy about possible a third species, but definitely two anyway. So where do you find seagrass? So seagrass grows in sheltered bays in mud and sandy areas. So it needs a soft sediment. This is because it has a root structure. So if you think about the seaweeds we were just talking about, they all grow attached to rocks, rocky surfaces, hard surfaces. They need something hard to grow onto. Seagrasses actually have a root system, so you need soft sediment for the root system to develop. I've put it down three species in Ireland here. We'll go with that. The type we're looking at is called Zostera marina, and it grows entirely below low water. It's an entirely submerged plant. There's another smaller species, Zostera nulti, which grows intertidally, but won't be considering that today. It's not something, not a species I have any experience with at all. And in suitable conditions, it'll grow in dense beds or meadows, which is really a sight to behold when you see a seagrass meadow. So that's just a little bit of, we've kind of already seen that map, but that's just the kind of more precise locations within the two bays. We have three seagrass beds in both bays, three each. So why is seagrass important? Well, in suitable conditions, seagrass forms extensive underwater meadows which create complex, highly productive and biologically rich habitats. I took that from someone else and I thought that actually can't be beaten. It really does sum up the importance of seagrass meadows. And I think sometimes with conservation, there's sometimes some people say, well, what's the point of saving bats? You know, what do bats do for us, kind of thing. I think it's useful. Sometimes it's a useful concept that's been developed called ecosystem services, and this is basically things that nature does for us for free, and without which we wouldn't be able to function. Our society wouldn't be able to function. So seagrass meadows provide us with some ecosystem services. So we'll just go through those just to give an idea of uh, why seagrass is so important. Sorry, 2 seconds there. So it's a keystone habitat. So that means it'd be like on land, or it'd be like a heather upland or an oak forest. It's a distinctive habitat of its own, defined by the plants that are growing there, the environmental conditions, the physical conditions. Like I say, it needs a sandy or muddy substrate, and the animal and plant community that's living within it. It has an extraordinary ability to absorb and store atmospheric carbon. So this value is often kind of bandied around, 30 times greater than the same area of tropical rainforest. I've actually not been able to find the source reference for this. It's definitely true that a seagrass accumulates carbon, no doubt about it, and in very, very efficiently. But whether that value is correct or not, I would hesitate until I actually find where that figure came from. I think possibly as well, there seems to be seagrasses were not very well researched for a very long period of time. And it's only the last 10 years really that marine biologists have really kind of twigged the importance of seagrass, and more effort has gone into researching them. But I think at the same time, this research has revealed that they're much more complex than we thought. And there's lots of cycling of minerals and nutrients through seagrass beds, and actually being able to just kind of come up with a figure of like this is very, very difficult. But without doubt, they have an amazing ability to what we call sequester carbon. That means take it out of the environment and then store it in. Okay, so as we briefly mentioned earlier, it's a true plant, so it photosynthesizes. So it turns essentially sunlight energy into food, a magic process that supports all life on Earth. And seagrasses store carbon in their root system. So they have a very complex root system, including rhizomes, which quite a lot of land plants have. If you're a gardener, you'll know such species which have rhizomes. So like thickened underground stems. And they also suspend organic material that gets trapped in the sediment around the seagrass. So if you can imagine all the kind of fronds of the seagrass kind of moving in the current, as the water starts to flow through the fronds, it starts to slow down. It slows down the speed of the water movement. And there's always bits suspended in water. If you're divers, you'll obviously be aware of that, because that's what kind of reduces the visibility. It's suspended particles in the water. So as the water flows through the seagrass bed, those particles can fall out of suspension and settle on the seabed. So it'd be like bits of plankton, small fragments of seaweed, that kind of thing. But one issue, which we'll come back to later, means that this carbon is basically getting locked down into the sediment. But if the seagrass is dredged, then that carbon is released back into the environment again. So I think someone might have their microphone on. Just please even just check just to turn it off. So continuing, I'm getting a bit of feedback there. Is everyone okay? Okay, seems to be okay. Right, so seagrass is also very important for biodiversity, including many commercial species and the young of larger fish. And recent estimates suggest that seagrass meadows support 20% of the world's biggest fisheries through the provision of nursery habitat. So if you think how important fisheries are, if you consider 1/5 of that is related to seagrass meadows. So very important commercially, as well as for just the general benefits of increased biodiversity. Provides protection from coastal erosion, so it stabilizes soft mud and sand sediments, which are notoriously mobile. So if you can imagine like a sandy seashore, when the waves come in, the sand just gets moved all over the place. If you've got seagrass present, it just binds all that in place. The middle bit I was just talking about there. But what this means is that seagrass engineer the conditions that they require for its own survival. Now, again, if I just take an example from land, you think of maybe something like a forest, where the forest trees crowd out smaller kind of shrubs and bushes from growing. So they kind of make their own environment, or heather up on uplands. It makes the soil more acid, so which heather likes acid soil, but lots of other plants struggle to grow in acid soil. So they're developing the environment around them to encourage their own growth. So, which is very important when we're talking about later about maybe restoration of seagrass, because it's capable of quite fast regeneration. So among the many things that we're doing with Cork Sub Aqua Club is just kind of making recordings of biodiversity. And I know a lot of you coming in today are coming through Sea Search. So we've been basically using the Sea Search kind of methodology for giving a kind of a rough metric for biodiversity, number of species we're recording, and whether species are common, abundant, rare, that kind of thing. So I'm just going to go through a few of the species that we've encountered in Oysterhaven. So lesser spotted cat shark and hermit crab. So most of our sharks and rays are under threat. So very important that it supports species like that, and rays as well. Pipefish. Pipefish are kind of specialists, seagrass specialists. So you might have 3 or 4 different species of pipefish in a seagrass bed. And I just reminded, we were chatting beforehand, in case you weren't aware, but a dead seahorse was found on the beach near Youghal at Ballycotton recently. And seahorses, again, are seagrass specialists. But it just occurred to me, really just say a few words that they're particularly skittish fish. They're protected in the UK, and one of the protections they have in the UK is that it's an offence to photograph them using strobe lights. So if you're lucky enough to find one, if you're on a scuba dive, please don't use any lighting to take a photograph. But please do take a photograph, because records are really, really valuable. I should add, I mean, there are very few records of seahorses in Ireland, but having one recorded so recently does give us a good hope that maybe they are starting to colonise. Fanworm, peacock worm, sabella, decorated crab, a long-legged spider crab, so very typical of seagrass beds in Ireland. And then commercial fish, so it's a plaice, but also cod are quite common in seagrass beds in the winter, so we might not be diving seagrass beds in the winter. But if you do get a chance, you might well see cod. I've certainly seen them in Oysterhaven. And then coming back to that fifth of all fisheries, getting some function from seagrass. Lobsters, often seen out. Unusual to see one during daylight, but often see them on night dives in seagrass. And then shoulder sand eels and sprat, which are very common in seagrass habitats. And what I suppose one of the things about preserving seagrass as a habitat is if you get large amounts of things like sand eels and sprat growing up in the kind of haven of a kind of nursery habitat, as they grow, they spill out into the wider environment, where they become food for larger fish and for marine mammals, whales even, and seabirds. And in fact, we were in Oysterhaven last, I think it was October, and there were terns kind of plunge diving and a porpoise feeding out over the seagrass. And when we actually went in, there were huge shoals of sand eels out there that day. So seagrass is great. We can all agree, fantastic stuff. But unfortunately, it's a habitat that's under threat. So the estimates for the UK is that they've lost 90% of seagrass in the past century, of which half of this loss has occurred in the last 30 years, which is quite extraordinary. So we don't have figures for Ireland. We actually have very little historic information on seagrass occurrence in Ireland, but it's reasonable to assume that we have had similar losses. It's a habitat that is under threat globally. As I said, there's 72 species globally. They occur in all oceans apart from around the Antarctic and the Arctic areas. So they are, yeah, something that really need to be looked after. And the threats include things like pollution from agriculture and wastewater, coastal developments, trawling and dredging is a particular issue, non-native invasive species. So the picture on the right there is Sargassum muticum wireweed, which we find commonly in Oysterhaven, but it seems to be reasonably in balance with the rest of the ecosystem there. But in some places it can grow kind of out of control and dominate the habitat. And climate change. Like a lot of marine species, seagrass is very temperature dependent. The sea is such a stable environment in terms of temperature that a lot of marine species aren't really able to cope with unexpected changes in temperature, particularly high temperatures. So I will just mention in particular a situation in Kinsale Harbour where a application has been made to an aquaculture application for growing bottom mussels. So just for people who may not appreciate the difference, the mussel cultivation you see in places like Bantry Bay, where there's rows and rows and rows of floats at the surface. Underneath them, I have a system of ropes and with vertical lines coming down between the buoys, and the mussels are growing suspended in the water column from those buoys. What's proposed here is the mussels grow on the seabed, and in order to harvest them, they're simply dredged up off the seabed. We were looking at satellite images of the area, and we'd noticed that the seagrass beds that we already were aware of in Oysterhaven, you could see them in the satellite photographs. And when we looked at Kinsale Harbour, it did look like there were possibly seagrass beds, unknown seagrass beds at this point, in Kinsale Harbour. And we put divers out and snorkelers, and we were able to confirm that there were indeed seagrass beds out there. And we mapped those last summer. So it's a little bit difficult to see here, but it has James Fort Blockhouse at the top there. And we come down slightly and slightly to the right, there's a slightly darker area. And this, you can see a slightly darker area in the water. And another bit, there's a little wisp of cloud to the south of that, and another darker area. So those are the two areas we thought could be seagrass. And when we actually got out there with the GPS plotter, those turned out to be the seagrass areas that we identified. I'll be talking a little bit later about how we do these plots. And then, so the image on the left is our GPS plotting, and the image on the right is from the bottom mussel aquaculture license, showing the proposed area where the mussel bed would be located. As you can see, it pretty much obliterates the top bed and cuts up most of the bottom one as well. So that application is under review. There will be a decision made in, we think, October 2026 regarding that application. But at least the department has the necessary information now to know that there's seagrass there and there's an important habitat there. Because that wasn't raised actually in the application. There was no indication of any feature within the environment there. So we've got an important habitat which is under threat largely from human actions. So what can we do about it? Well, the first thing then would be to improve the control of nutrients. So nutrients, things like nitrogen and phosphorus, we apply them to land, on agricultural land, and they're also released through wastewater. So our human waste that we produce is very high in nitrogen and phosphorus. It goes to wastewater treatment plant when a lot of this is removed, but it still can be quite high levels going out in the final effluent. So better control of nutrient inputs, which means kind of increasing funding for Irish Water, Oysterhaven, to improve their wastewater treatment plants. We have a new planning agency, MARA, the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority, should help with protection of features like seagrass because it's providing a more centralised way of dealing with human activities occurring at sea. So, be they offshore wind, aquaculture, fisheries, and as well as protection of areas of biodiversity. So, we have the EU Habitats Directive at the moment and the EU Birds Directive. Neither of these include seagrass as a standalone feature, but one of the Habitats Directive does give leeway for the protection of particular habitats, hence the name. And one of those is shallow bays. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, seagrass is a frequent feature in a shallow bay. So if you have a shallow bay, that can be protected under the Habitats Directive. But unfortunately, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, our protections under the Habitats Directive for marine protected areas, for special areas of conservation, wouldn't really be the best in a lot of places. So there's no prohibition, for example, on putting a bottom trawl through an SAC. That's actually legal. So, and as we mentioned, if you're dredging seagrass, then it's going to damage it and also release all its stored carbon. So one particular threat is boat moorings. Now, this photograph is taken from the Sea Isles, which lie off the southwest of Cornwall. And you can see, as I mentioned earlier as well, you can see the seagrass growing under the water as a dark area on the seabed. And you can see in this image, you've got loads of circles cut into that dark area. So dark area is a seagrass. And what's happening there is the mooring chains for the boats are swinging around along the axis of the mooring point, of the mooring block. And as the chain drifts around with the boat attached to the chain, to the buoy, it's scouring the seabed and removing the seagrass. So this is a quick kind of a demonstration of what's going on. So the image on the left there would be similar to a typical mooring. We'd normally have a chain and then a rope actually going up to the buoy at the surface rather than a chain going all the way up to the buoy. But the result is the same. As the buoy is moved around, pulled around by the boat, moving with the wind and the tide, it forms a circle as it moves around, scouring everything in its path. So a solution would be, for this particular problem, is to use a seagrass-friendly mooring, or what's called an advanced mooring system. So this is something that we're certainly looking into at Cork Sub Aqua Club. We've bought one of these moorings and are hoping to trial it this year. In the diagram here, the mooring is bored into the seabed using a screw, like an auger, which are quite difficult to come across or get the equipment to bore that down into the sediment. But even though it's just like a big corkscrew, because of the vacuum formed as any upward pressure is applied, it just holds very firmly in place. What we have at Cork Sub Aqua Club is we have something like the image on the left, where we have the concrete block. So what we anticipate is just switching out our conventional mooring for one of these advanced moorings, but attaching it to the mooring block because the mooring block is already there. This is what it looks like. It's a little bit difficult to judge the scale of that. That buoy is actually significantly bigger than the normal buoy for attaching a rib or a kind of small boat of that size. It's probably 1.5 meters in diameter, something like that. I should have got a photograph with somebody in the photo. The next big thing to consider is we have some new regulations through from the EU, which came into place in 2024, and that's the EU Nature Restoration Regulation. And fantastic news is that seagrass is included as a marine habitat within this regulation. Just to clarify this, in broad terms, Ireland must restore 30% of its seagrass that is not currently in good condition to good condition by 2030. Actually, that more accurately is Ireland must have a plan to restore 30% of its seagrass. and a plan to be in place by 2030. The Which kind of makes more sense because this regulation only came in last year. The documentation going back from the states, the member states, saying how they're going to do this isn't due to be submitted until September, October of this year, which would leave 3 years to restore 30% of the seagrass, which is clearly couldn't be done. But there needs to be a plan in place by this September how we're going to achieve this. And just to be say there are also further targets set out for 2040 and 2050, but I think we'll get to 30% first. But what it does mean is that in practical terms, we really can't allow our existing seagrass meadows to deteriorate. Because if they're deteriorating, we need to be restoring them to good condition within the next kind of decade, really. There's a bit of, what would you say, uncertainty about how we measure good condition. Exactly what does that mean? And also what our baseline is, because you can only restore 30% of something if you know what you've got to start off with. So it looks like over the next few years there's going to be a lot of study done on seagrass to find out what we have, where it is, and what condition it's in. So, I mean, we're hoping that the work we've been doing through Cork Sub Aqua Club will kind of help to provide some of that information, really. So we're becoming increasingly aware of how important seagrass is, and it's also getting increased protection coming in over the next few years. So it is important, as I was just saying there, to know where our seagrass meadows are located and how healthy they are, so we can tell whether they're a good status or not. The kind of things that we've been doing with Cork Sub Aqua Club, we've been monitoring the biodiversity. So we basically use kind of a standardised sea search methodology for that. Recording non-native species. Really, the only one we really recorded is Sargassum muticum, or wireweed. Measuring nutrient concentration and recording water temperature and clarity. So we have a little, it's called a tiny tag, which we have attached to our buoy where our boat is moored. And it's a small self-contained, it's like a size of a little bit bigger than a coin, a little plastic coated dongly kind of thing, I suppose, which takes the temperature every minute or so continually. So you get a really nice plot of temperature over time when you upload it onto the computer. We started doing work around the reproductive cycles of the seagrass, so trying to get recordings of timings of flowering and seed ripening. We've done transects through seagrass, which we've been used to record plant density and plant size. So what this means is we run we start off with a set point within the seagrass, and then run a tape measure, like a surveying tape measure, across the seagrass from the shoreward side to the seaward side. And then we have what's called a quadrat, which is a metal square. I think it's a 50-meter square, 50 by 50, and that's then placed alongside the measuring tape at specified intervals. So it randomizes where you're taking the counts of plants, and you simply record a number of plants within your 50 centimeter square, and then multiply it by 4 to give you the number of plants per meter squared. And then you can also take individual plants and measure the lengths of the leaves to give an idea of plant growth and plant size and plant mass. We've also been using GPS to plot extensive seagrass meadows, and I'm hoping that Hugh Nolan's on the call here. He is. I was going to hand over to Hugh for a moment here. So this is a photograph of myself and Hugh out doing seagrass monitoring with the GPS. It's a fairly simple method, but it does require training it's essentially like not entirely free diving, but it's a bit more than snorkeling. So I don't know, Hugh, are you available there?
I don't know. Can you hear me there?
I can hear you.
Yeah. So I've been out when I my name is Hugh Nolan. I was with the Cork Sub Aqua Club a number of years ago, and I left them. And one of the reasons I came back was I knew Tim before I'd left the club, and I'd seen some of the work that was being done with regard to seagrass and seagrass surveying and mapping, and that was one of the reasons that brought me back to the club. So when I came back to the club, I was a scuba diver, but when I came back to the club, I came back as a snorkeler. And I suppose there's a lot that Tim has gone through there, but I find seagrass, I just any habitat underwater amazing. But one of the things that I do that suits for seagrass surveying is snorkeling. And the one aspect that we do there is that I'm involved in is the GPS mapping. And so for that, the GPS would be on the surface. This is an example of the actual handheld GPS that we actually use. And so that needs to be on the surface. So I have another weighted line then. And what we do is was the weighted line. So the handheld GPS is attached on the surface. And what we do we bring the weighted line then to the edge of the seagrass bed, and I'll duck dive down. And again, we're going to be full safety, so we're going to we'll be diving in buddies. So we take it in turns, and what we do is we duck dive down. When the weight is by the edge of the seagrass bed, we make sure the line is straight, come back up and log that GPS point. And then what we do is once we want the starting point mapped, we then duck dive back down and move that weight along the edge of the seagrass bed. And when it's kind of because the seagrass patch, it's like a quilt, it's little patches. Uh, um, so once we get to the edge of a patch, we come back up, and again? This is just holding your breath. Leave the weight on the bottom, and keeping the line straight. When you come back up to the surface, log that, mark that GPS point. It's stored on the handheld GPS, and then we continue around until we get back to where we started. And then when we've done that, then that's my job finished, and I bring that back in. And there's other people in the club then have the software for uploading those GPS waypoints, and they're then able to generate a map, which was one of the point on the previous slide that Tim had there, which shows the outline of the points. But I find seagrass, do you know, I think it's an amazing thing. It's the amount of actual life that you can see inside the seagrass bed. And we have the privilege there of the seagrass bed, which was by Oysterhaven, which is quite was it shallower, ranging from 1 to 2 meters, or was it when the tide is out, to 6, 7 meters. And again, you can see that's in by the shoreline, whereas the one that's over in Kinsale, that's kind of in the flow of the estuary. And what I noticed straight away about that seagrass, it's much more vibrant, it's longer, and it's much more dense. And it's obviously it's a bit deeper then as well. But so the thing about that then is all the life that I with all the photographs that are taken by some of the club members, just all the life that's inside in both any of the seagrass beds, which I find just amazing. Um, I have some props here. I can show you some of the actual jig we use and the weight we use. The weight I use on the bottom is a 3 kilo weight and just a line. And then the thing is just to keep the line straight, coming to the surface, so that you know when you map it at the surface that that it reflects where exactly that weight is on the bottom. Um, I I don't know. I could stay talking, Tim, but
That's that's great, Hugh. No, that's brilliant. Thanks ever so much.
thanks, Tim.
Okay, take care. Thanks, Hugh. So yeah, that gives you a bit of an idea of the method we've been using anyway. Um, so yeah, basically snorkel pairs are using normal kind of safety, kind of following normal safety regulations, um, with O2 available and first aid kits, so that kind of stuff, and shore marshal. But working out in a snorkel buddy pair, it works really effectively because we're talking quite shallow water, generally speaking. Okay, so I suppose for Cork Sub Aqua Club, our kind of big excitement this year is getting that advanced mooring system into the water. It's generating a lot of interest, not just with people in kind of diving community, but also the kind of wider boating community in Oysterhaven and Kinsale. Like people I've shown it to quite a few people there, and they're like, "Whoa, I've never heard of anything like this before." So it's going to be really interesting giving that a go. And one of the things we want to be doing is looking at the state of the seabed under our mooring when the chain's lifted, and then following it through with the new mooring in place to see if there's any regeneration of seagrass or other habitats underneath it. We're also looking at potential to harvest seeds and to grow on young seagrass plants. So this has been done quite a bit in the UK now. There's an organisation called Project Seagrass in Wales, and they've been growing seagrasses up and planting them out to try and help regeneration of existing beds. We continue to monitor the seagrass beds in Kinsale and Oysterhaven. We know there's another seagrass bed actually next to Charles Fort in Kinsale Bay, which we haven't managed to look at yet, and to carry on looking for new seagrass areas based on the aerial photography, since we now know that that is a viable method for discovering new seagrass beds. Like to try and engage with local community groups. We had Minister Christopher O'Sullivan there in the centre visit us in Oysterhaven in January to look at some of the projects that's being funded by LawPro, the Local Authority Water Programme, and continue liaising with other environmental NGOs and government bodies. So I mentioned LawPro, really good organisation to work with, the Local Authority Water Programme. So they fund community water projects associated with improving water quality. Is to do with the Water Framework Directive, which most people can think is just to do with rivers and streams and lakes, but it actually extends to a mile out to sea. So lots of marine projects could be covered through LawPro funding. So it's definitely, if you have a dive club and you're interested in doing projects like this, definitely consider applying for LawPro. It'd have to be for next year, I'm afraid. This year's funding is closed. We have a really good core of members within the Cork Sub Aqua Club who've committed a lot of time and energy to this project. And I think something like that Hugh was just saying there is it's kind of caught the imagination of members of the club. And when we started off, we were struggling to get 3 or 4 people out on a day, but now we're getting maybe a third of the club, a quarter or a third of the club coming out to help out on survey days. It's getting very, very popular. I think a lot of people appreciate that it's a bit of commitment of time, but it's providing so much kind of benefit, and it's really nice to feel that your time and effort diving is having a very positive outcome. I just mentioned a couple of the photographers there. So thank you. That's it. And if anyone has any questions.